The most interesting thing to me about the entirety of the USS United States aircraft carrier project is this. It gets cancelled because there's a big fuss of, oh, we don't need this large carrier. And then 3 years later they start building a carrier which is about 6 meters shorter. And a lot wider. And a lot bigger in every single way. And they build 4 of them. And then they build another 4. And then they build a nuclear powered one. And then they build more. And at a certain point you sit there and go, either the person who cancelled the USS United States had incredible foresight, realizing that this wasn't going to be a suitable carrier for their needs, or they were an absolute moron, and the US Navy had to wait an extra 3 years to get what they needed to get. It's up to you to decide. But it is one of those interesting things that the criteria for the United States, in many ways, was that it was going to provide a very capable carrier which could take strike capabilities and all sorts of things, and would enable, in many ways, you to focus the midway side like carriers, which had some issues because of, well, principally designing the way they were designing meant they were incredibly wet forward, and they would have some water issues. They were a very good design in so many ways, but stability was never their friend, and the more they modified, the more stability became less and less their friend. The thing is, you either have a carrier which is going to take everything off them, in terms of the heavyweight aircraft, allowing them to focus on the lighter fighters and air defense aircraft in many ways, or you design a new carrier which can do it all. And that's what they go with. That's what the Forrestals are. The new carriers that can do it all. They are capable of doing it all. They're not going to take anything off the midways. Now the midways are going to have to be viable in reference to them. And that, of course, is even more fun with their design. Rather than being supported by them. And that's the reality of the Forrestal class. They are this really interesting design, and I would call them the first supercarriers, but there's also an argument they're the first true post-World War II, post-treaty carriers. They are built with armour, they are built with gun armament, they are built with all sorts of things included, and they are built to a design which is far deeper hulled than American normal practice, but also are built with the armour on the flight deck rather than and the flight deck as the strength deck, because that does make for a lighter overall hull structure. I think there's someone at the house. I'm back. For those who are interested to know, it was Mr. Ghost. Invisible person again. I think the dogs are still getting used to the fact that they live now even more in the countryside, and they have even less traffic around. But no, the whole idea was, if you make the hull lighter, you can actually make it longer. You know, one of the things that you have to remember about ships is the structural weight and bearing on them, and the amount of force you can put on the hull. So if you can make the flight deck, which is the highest deck that is going to go to full length of the ship, well, obviously the strength deck, that means you don't have to have as much reinforcement at different points to support the decks above the strength deck. You're only supporting the island structure. That's the only thing which goes above it. And because you're already going to have stacks and things there, you're going to have a certain level of how to put this, material to deal with anyway. Now, one of the really cute things is that the Forrestal class are almost very, very even closer than they were historically to the USS United States, because they were actually looking at them going, can we have a retractable island structure? An island structure which actually goes in and comes out. They decided against this. A, because it was difficult to make work, and B, because quite a lot of admirals wanted a lot more space than you could really fit in a retractable structure. They really did. And the trouble is, when you're dealing with admirals of that quantity, but also that quality, in terms of how many stars or gold braid they have, they tend to have a say in these things. They can't necessarily do things like go, we like 5 carriers, and the politicians go, yes. That's not really a possibility. But they can usually go, hang on, no sir, in our esteemed opinion, we need more space for flag personnel, for decent staff, for bridge structuring, and you're already getting the ship, so you listen to it. I wish a few more admirals had spoken up over certain things elsewhere, but we'll leave that to one side. Pretty much, these carriers come in and they fuse the strike capability, the recon capability, and everything else that they wanted from the Midways and the USS United States into one hull. Yes, it can't carry as much and can't carry the same strike aircraft that the USS United States was supposed to carry, but it can carry some very decent ones. We often forget about things like the Vigilante today. That was a capability which has never really been replicated. Having it in service was useful. Yes, there are some problems with it. Yes, it is not perfect. No design of aircraft ever is without payoffs. If you have excellence in one area, you are going to have negatives in another. That seems to be the way it goes. But they're still very, very useful aircraft. Anyway, wonder what I've seen this time. Another visitation from the ghost. What can I say? Anyway, so shameless book plug. I do this in pretty much every single video because this channel, this whole thing is made possible by you and your support. But the rest of my academic career, as it goes, is pretty much, how do I put this? They care more about, it's more is cared about in terms of books and how they sell than pretty much anything else. Doesn't always seem to make sense to me, that one, but that's the way it is. And you can't change the system from without. You have to an extent, be within it. So you have to play the game a little bit. But I then do I play a little differently than most of my colleagues as well, because I advertise my books quite a lot. Currently I only have this one out, Travels, Battles and Darings. More are coming out, hopefully for Christmas, hopefully Kindle Direct Publishing, and I'll get it all sorted out. That is the plan. Pneumonia, budget allowing. The joy of pneumonia is, and I'll explain more about this at the end when I give the update at the end, is it costs you a lot more to get things done because you can't do them yourselves. When I think about the sheer amount of DIY I normally do and the amount I'm actually able to go on at the moment, and having to have a handyman come in, who's very nice, very skilled, very highly recommended, really, really capable, really good at his job. I think it's Cornwall Handyman Services, I think that's what they're called. Excellent if you're down in Cornwall, and really good, really highly recommended. But it does cost more to have them do it than to do it yourself. Me, I can be paid in a Chinese takeaway if I buy myself, treat myself to that, or as I'm here now and I've got a far bigger kitchen to work around in, I usually just cook myself something. But yeah. So how do I play this differently from my colleagues? I advertise my books. I talk about my books. In every single video, I mention Travels, Battles and Darings. It's a really good book. I really loved writing it. And I really felt it starts sharing my passion for the ships, which are often what you see written is, oh, this cruiser, this aircraft carrier, this battleship, and listing out their names, and then 15 destroyers or 10 destroyers, and they deserve more than that. They do deserve more than that. They do a lot more than that. And so, that's why I started writing the book at it. And it's all about the genesis of the modern destroyer, a general purpose asset that actually ends up filling the role of the cruiser. Because as I would often argue with people these days, most of our escorts, they are cruisers in their peacetime roles. They're designed for the presence mission, they're designed to show flags, etc. It's just that the frigates are the ASW cruisers, and the destroyers are the AA warfare cruisers, anti-aircraft. And I'm not sure what the ships often called cruisers basically are just have some extra command systems put in them. In the case of the Ticonderogas, also designed to try and make people sick in the way they're structured. But we'll leave that to one side. It's all fun and games. So let's consider how they did move on from the United States, because you're taking a design which originally was completely flat. It was a flat top. It's one of the last designs for a flat top carrier. And you're basically going, right, and we need to have some function of that because we want to have some of the heavy aircraft capabilities. But there are other functions we want in this because we want this to also be able to do what we would like our next generation midway fleet carrier to do. So basically, the super carriers are in many ways we're our fleet carrier, but adding on the strike a section of strike component capability. So making a strike a super carrier is pretty much a fleet carrier with that strike carrier component built into it, so it can do both roles. And there are some interesting points of design here, which you can see some World War II experience in designs, but actually that leads you going to the wrong place in the jet era. You know, the positioning of certain of the elevators, let's be honest. The really interesting one is the port elevator. Forward, with both of the waste catapults going over it. That means if you're operating aircraft from there, you can't use the elevator. It doesn't help. And also, it means that if you're loading up those catapults, you have to bring aircraft across the deck. And you're also trying to build in an angled flight deck. And one of the interesting things is that the class basically... The first two are designed without an angled flight deck, and then they're modified under construction. And the second two of the class are designed with an angled flight deck from the get-go. And there are some changes which go with that. It's got 8 5-inch guns, which is actually the same as the USS United States was going to have. Doesn't have all the other secondaries that the USS United States was going to have, but honestly, the Forrestal class are a nice move forward. They really are a very decent design. It's a very solid design. And I would argue, in some regards, it's a Dreadnought-like moment. Because it signifies, yeah, we're here. We're now into a new carrier age. Things are going to change when these enter the water. And you will see a lot of the larger units from the World War II generation carriers will chug on for years, be modified and in service for years, decades. But honestly, they're always seen at that point as the old style carrier. From then on, they are the old style carrier. This is what's coming. This is the modern carrier design and the modern capability. And there's a lot there that you see which sort of does fit with what we were previously talking about in terms of old World War II carrier design, but also in terms of modern carrier design. That's the other thing you can see with the Forrestal class. They are a transition. They're shaping. But the trouble with being transition means you are there to learn lessons from. And they do learn lessons from the Forrestal. That will go into the Kitty Hawk class, and then we'll go into the Enterprise, and we'll then go into Nimitz class, and of course the Gerald Ford class. These things all build upon each other. Again, with defense procurement, it's rare things are evolutionary. It's usually more iterative. It's usually more, we are taking what we know from the past work and we're going to change Things which we think will fix the things which were problems we perceived in the past. Things we perceived which weren't as capable. So that's what it is about. So this is in some ways is a combination of lessons learnt from the Midways and lessons learnt from the USS United States to create the Forrestal. The other thing you'll notice, and it's the big thing I noticed really when I looked at this, there's no real dead space on that flight deck that you want to park aircraft. If you're trying to operate aircraft from there, you've got a little bit of space between the two elevators, sort of here, but that's not a lot of space, and it's not really that good. But I suppose you've got a little bit of space forward, but again, you've then got the catapult there, so that's not really going to be free space. You've almost got a problem if you've got aircraft waiting to join the waste catapults, you're not going to be able to land aircraft. So, to me, someone has put in a lot of idea into this, a lot of thinking, and going, we need this components. But they haven't thought through the practicalities of operating it. To me, I'd say it's sort of an engineering and officer's design, and no one has got a chief petty officer who was flight deck crew to go, sir, that flight deck, yeah, where do I park aircraft? And I suppose you can park them inboard of the elevators and the island structure along there, but that's going to encroach into the center of your flight deck, so that's going to be... There are options, and they did it. I know there are pictures of them doing it, but it doesn't look to me like something which is going to have a lot of space on the flight deck, which means your deck alert is going to suffer, but also your ability to refuel and rearm on the deck without striking below is going to suffer. And that all adds time and complication onto operation. Sometimes when you really don't want it. It's not a bad design, but they're also built in the period when there was more than just one builder of aircraft carriers for the USN. It wasn't just Newport News. There was also the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and later on there would be the New York Navy Yard, the one in Jersey. America actually had multiple carrier builders. Think about that. That was the level of residual infrastructure they had, and residual infrastructure, I suppose, they had, and was also a viability for them. All these yards could build these big carriers. All these yards could provide that capability, which meant there was a little bit of competition on the pricing. It meant there was a little bit of space as far as the complexity of maintaining those carriers was concerned, if you need to do work on them. And more importantly than all of that, it meant that there was some actual competition in the provision to boost the quality. It wasn't a case of, we are the single source supplier and you can't go anywhere else, so you have to take what we're prepared to do. Interesting times. So let's consider the vitals, shall we? Which are illuminating as vitals go, because let's be honest, with a full load of 82,000 tons, that's roughly 3 times the maximum treaty limit of 27,000 tons, Second London Naval Treaty, 61,000 tons in light. If we consider the USS United States, that of course, that mythical supercarrier that's laid down but then stopped literally just after the keel's been laid, that was going to be 68,250 tons and 83,200 tons full. So you're really not dealing with something which is a million miles away from it. It's even closer once you start looking at the length, because it's, again, the United States was supposed to be 332 meters. This is 326.1 meters. The USS United States is supposed to be 58 meters wide in flight deck. Well, it's 73 meters. Or, if you want it in feet, because you prefer it in feet, 190 feet versus 238 feet. I.e., these are, well, 48 feet wider. Beamier on the flight deck. And yes, that is to an extent because they are an angled flight deck scenario, so rather than a coaxial deck. Even one designed in the same way as the US and the United States, it's going to be wider, but still, there are reasons for it. Now, as you can see also, when you look at these pictures, there are two of them in this picture. And you notice that deck parking includes spaces such as on top of the elevators. See what I mean? First generation problems. The aircraft have grown in size, you need more space to store them. Where are you going to put them? They have 8 Babcock and Wilcox boilers, supplying 4 Westinghouse geared steam turbines to generate roughly 280,000 shaft horsepower to drive 4 shafts, for a top speed of roughly 34 knots. Some are listed as 33 knots, some are listed as 34 knots. Frankly, my common view, as I've said before many times, is the top speed listed for any naval warship is usually the speed that they can go in peacetime safely with everything doing normal scenarios, not that actual top speed. The actual top speed is, we have a high level emergency, we will not give a flying hoot if we have to replace the boilers and engines after this, let's crank out as much as we can. That's usually their top speed, and that usually is a marginal difference, 3 or so knots in directions, is because again it's the amount of power you need to any increase in speed goes very high. So if they gain an extra chunk of power, it might only translate into an extra knot or 2 knots of speed. That can be all the difference you need in a critical operation. That can be all the difference you need in a critical operation, but it's often not justifiable in peacetime, and it's often not their standard operating regulations. And basically this goes the whole way through. And their air groups, one of the interesting things about those is they sort of go up and down. She starts out with roughly 70 aircraft in 1960, but they always could carry more. And by about 1970, they have roughly 90 aircraft aboard as an average, including that lovely North American RA-5C Vigilante. It's a sexy looking aircraft, that one. It's going to be coming up in key aircraft at some point this year. And by 1981, it's roughly 86 to 92 aircraft. They were able to maintain these consistently high air group numbers because partially they were designed to do so. But they also have other fun things. One, they have a slight variation. There's a reason why the numbers are given as sort of brackets, because there does seem to be variance between the 2 ships, in fact between all 4 ships, but especially between the 2 ships which were built on the coaxial design. I originally built on that design and then changed during the construction process, and the 2 which were designed from the ground up as a angled flight deck system. There is a difference in how many aircraft they can operate. There is a difference, not by a lot, we're talking about a handful of aircraft here, but enough that it changes the numbers. And there's a difference in terms of the flight deck parking space, in terms of the flight deck space itself. It seems to variance, although I'm fairly sure at least one book I read is completely and utterly wrong, because it had them being almost, their flight deck of the second 2 being 10 meters wider almost than the flight deck of the first 2, and I don't think it was quite that generous. I just don't. I'm not sure where that author got that information from, but I don't think it's in the 80s, the high 80s, and definitely not. Low 80s, who knows, but I don't think the high 80s. I don't think it's the low 80s either. I think it's the... I think there's some variance, but I don't think it's that great. Again, sources have been differential, and my favourite source for the Forrestal class is still in a book somewhere in here. So I wasn't able to check that. But anyway. The 4 steam catapults, the 4 deck-edge aircraft elevators, they are a great thing to have. But as we already discussed with design earlier, there is a small problem with that, in that when you're using all 4 catapults, you're definitely not using all 4 elevators. Because one of those elevators blocks the other catapults. It's annoying, but it's something you work around, and you work out how to use. This ship and this class are about the capability of the aircraft they bring. They're about providing the best base for those aircraft, so they can provide their jobs. And their jobs are ultimately air defense, the outer air battle, the wider air battle of any naval operation, and strike, and reconnaissance. And again, the Vigilante was a good aircraft for that. I should probably have the key aircraft of the Vigilante was supposed to come out the same week as this did. Well, I wrote the script, but I'm not recording any of the key aircraft and key ship videos at the moment because, well, it's taking me as much time to record roughly 2 videos a week as it is normally to record about 6. It's fun. I keep running out of steam. But these ships didn't. They really didn't. Entering service, they were effective from the get-go, pretty much. This is probably best illustrated by the Supercarriers, where even though Forrestal was less than a year out of commissioning, and was still really working up, she's positioned outside Mediterranean, ready to come in if needed. And her very first deployment, not long after that, is to Sixth Fleet in the Mediterranean. You know, she is literally there, and there as a presence, as a big and visible presence. And that's part of what she's for. Honestly, one of the things that they really do get into a lot when they enter service is a lot of the diplomacy, a lot of the presence missions, a lot of the showing people what aircraft carriers do, a lot of non-naval personnel's first encounter from many nations with an aircraft carrier in terms of when they become politicians and when they become leaders of those countries or senior military figures, is a Forrestal class. It's being invited aboard a Forrestal class. It's having the demonstrations of, this is naval aviation, this is naval air power. Which means they in many ways start to define the carrier going forward and define people's concept of carriers. And this is the thing, they are these all-singing, all-dancing assets, capable of launching strike aircraft, reconnaissance aircraft, a huge fighter wing, a huge tactical strike wing, anti-submarine warfare, carrier-on-board delivery, everything. They are equipped for it all. And this is something which goes into their role later on as they're leading the fleet, as they're being part of it and, you know, providing it with its core. And they do provide it with its core. There's a good half a decade to a decade or so where it's definitely very much the Forrestal class. I'm talking mostly about 1960s, but also into the 1970s, are very much the leading elements of it, because they are either the most recent, biggest, best assets they have available, or the most worked up of the recent, biggest, best assets they have available. The ones they can rely on, the ones they know will work. And so they get used a lot. They truly do. This can be seen by the fact that the ships get used so often as the forefront of operations. Saratoga is a good example of this. Between May 1969 and September 1970, she'd host the President of the United States, that's President Nixon, twice. And she'd also take part in leading a task group in, how do I put this, showing force to the Soviets and other interested parties after the hijacking of the Transworld Airlines plane to Syria and the coup in Libya. They were important tasks, and it's appropriate that Saratoga was the vessel used for this. After all, she's named for a carrier which survived World War II, a Lexington-class carrier which survived World War II, only to be cruelly and humiliatingly blown up in nuclear weapons testing by the US Navy in an act of cultural and historical vandalism, of which, frankly, in naval history, there are very few surpassing it. I can think of some third rates and other things which were wantonly destroyed, but honestly, blowing it up using nuclear weapons on it is taking it a little bit too far. And they kept on being used to lead the fleet. They kept on being useful. Ranger, which of course was pictured earlier, was another good example of this. She spent a lot of time on Vietnam service, being a critical asset for many operations and many missions over Vietnam. And quite a lot of work in the Gulf of Tonkin, of course, as a result of that. When their service finally ended, well, they'd been in service a long time. This class had seen their way through the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. They get used in so many different operations, and each one probably does deserve its own key ships, and there will be a key ships on this class done at some point to go into those history points. But let's consider their utility. They are frontline aircraft carriers. They're not used as second-line assets. They're not demoted to amphibious ships or anything like that. No, they're used as frontline aircraft carriers from the late 1950s till nearly the 2000s. Those are years which are chock full of activity for the US Navy and for America as a whole. And they're useful. They're really useful. In fact, Independence is a good example. She was the 4th ship in the class. She literally is doing operations right up until she retires. On her last deployment to the Persian Gulf in 1998, she took part in Operation Southern Watch. And then she returns to Yokosuka, where she was relieved by the Kitty Hawk. She had been forward-based, doing all sorts of different operations for the US Navy for her entire career. And her career is an impressive one. It spans... seriously, it's hard to think literally like this. It spans nearly 40 years. In fact, it is literally October, November, December, 10th of January. Let's be honest, it's pretty much 3 months. You could be cautious and say 3 months and a week short of 40 years of service, of high intensity service. So they were built in many ways to cover a gap. They were designed to fill a hole, to provide both the future of fleet carrier, but also to take on that strike carrier mantle, which had been discontinued. And they prove useful and practical, harshly because of their size. Let's be honest, it does make them highly adaptable, for 40 odd years. So let's consider the summary of the Forrestals, shall we? So with that abridged bit of service life, and I wanted to give some examples of their service, but I didn't want to go into too much detail because, as I said, I think that's more of a key ships thing, their service, because some of the stuff is pretty darn cool. And that also wasn't the focus of this video. This video is more about their design history and their evolution and their refits. And I didn't discuss their refits much. In fact, they gained Sea Sparrows and different command and control systems and other things were modified around. Because, again, that's all window dressing, really. The core part is they're so adaptable because of their design, because of the quality of their design. And because when they're being built, the honest thought was, how can we make them better? How can we make them more useful? Now, they also provided a lot of learning material and a lot of experience for US naval development. For example, if we consider this, you have Saratoga here, you have the John F. Kennedy here. The Kennedy, of course, has 2 lifts forward, 1 aft on the starboard side, and on the port side, the lift is aft. Again, these are things which you learn after doing it. And you learn after testing it, and you learn after going through going, well, actually, what we worked on in theory doesn't work. Or rather, the theory which had been based around a coaxial arrangement, then adapted for an angled flight deck, didn't work with the reality of jet operation from an angled flight deck arrangement. It's sad to say, but there are some things you honestly only learn by living with it. You really do. So these ships, they provide the core of the US Navy's development approach for carriers. You know, we can look at the Gerald R. Fords and we can draw a direct line back to the Forrestals. We can draw a direct line back to the Secretary of Navy and the various personnel who fought for the US Navy's carrier air arm, who looked like they'd lost everything when the USS United States was cancelled. And then within 4 years, they laid the groundwork for the future bedrocks of the US Navy. Because let's be honest, carriers are that for the US Navy. Their aircraft carriers are that ultimate sign of, we are very interested in what is going on in this area. We have sent a very large vessel with a large air group, larger than some nations' own air forces, and more capable than many other nations' air forces, even when they've got more aircraft than we have. And we've sent them to be very close to you to say hello and show we are interested. Now, a carrier is not an invaluable tool. It's not an invulnerable tool. It has a value. And as ever with all these things, they have vulnerability. If you can get through all the layers of defense a task group puts up to defend itself, that interconnect between the different assets, you can take shots at the ships in the task group. And if you take the shots, you might hit. You might win. So all these things have vulnerability. I said it's got a value. It's not invulnerable. But the Forrestals are important because they also lay down what it means to be a carrier in the modern era. In many ways, their operations are what make nuclear-powered carriers sort of inevitable. Because the US Navy keeps wanting to move them around and around and around, and it's either a case of we need to build a lot more of these ships, we're talking like 3-4 dozen, or we need something which means that we can move them strategically a lot faster. And strategic speed is different than what you might think it is. You might think strategic speed is just the speed of the ship itself moving. That is true. But it's also, what is the logistical demand of that ship? What is it? Can we keep it moving while still sustaining it? If its fuel is refilled on a 10-20 year timeline, rather than every time it's used enough energy, that makes life a little bit easier logistically. That means you don't have to worry about fuel supplies en route. It also means you don't have to slow down and do all the things you have to do for fuel supplies en route. There are other ways you can resupply these ships, and that's the other interesting thing. They do set the mark for that. But these ships are all about the operational capability they bring to the Navy. They're all about the capability they can provide the Navy with, and by extension the United States. Their strike capability is a critical one. Their air defense capability is a superb one. Their anti-submarine warfare capability is crucial. All these things add up to a capability which can sustain the US Navy on operations. Especially if they have multiple of them. You have 2 carriers like this operating close together. That's a scary group already. That's a lot of mutual support going on. And that's really the advantage that we're talking about. That's really the core thing we're talking about when we're talking about these ships. They're all about the air group. They're all about their own survivability. They're all about the sheer size and scale of effort they can bring. That's what matters. And that's what a supercarrier really is. It's scale of effort. We've brought this thing which provides us with the largest scale of effort. If you can manage to win against this, good luck, but we doubt you're going to. And, oh, by the way, we have more. Having them all really adds up, because, oh, we're winning against this one. Oh, there's two. Are we able to win against both? Probably not. Even winning against one is going to be hard. Because, again, it's the concentration of air power and its logistical and infrastructure support. We can do a long-range strike. Great. But how far do the aircraft have to go back to resupply? Where is the resupply base? Can we hit it? All these things. Well, the Forrestal class is an aircraft carrier. It has those advantages. It's going to be able to operate closer. It's going to be able to change its position. Constantly it's changing its position. It's never in the same place it was a moment ago. And constantly it's also quite secure in that regards. Especially from counterattack, because the first things you need to know where your opponent is. And yes, I'm not saying that finding them is impossible, it really isn't. Enough satellites, enough watchers, you can spot where the carrier is eventually. But the thing is, that's the eventually part, that's the worrying part. How much damage, what does it do in the meantime? What does it cause you in the meantime? That's always the problem. Now the question for today's video, that's going to be in with the bonus slide. First things first, so, pneumonia recovery schedule. And I am apologising, some of these videos are going to be slightly abridged, because sometimes, some days, like today, I'm just feeling very listless today, I have to admit. I want to get the recordings done, I want to get them up, and I want to still have them of good quality, and this video, I think I've made it good. I think I'm happy enough with what it's covered. I realise I haven't covered some sections. I would like to have done more of the service lives, but I'm going to put that into a keyshits video. I'm also going to do that anyway, so that doesn't worry me much. It was more about the concept and the operation of it, and what they were, how useful they were. And I hope I covered that. Later in this week, hopefully Jessica Brisbane's question, submarine aircraft carriers. Why would anyone think the I-400 class was anything other than a huge waste of resources? I have to admit, Tuesday videos, Thursday videos, they are hoped for. It's hoped it's going to be a Tuesday video. It's hoped it's going to go up on Tuesday. It could be Wednesday. It's hoped it's going to be a Thursday video, but it could be a Friday or maybe even a Saturday if the upload time takes a lot forever. Sunday lives are going to be fairly constant. And thank you for people who are supporting those. They're going to be pretty much money for Clarke's. Book space ain't free until further notice, or until I've sorted out all this. Cause, yeah, I need books. Well, rather, I need bookshelves so I can access my books. Because I was planning on building my bookshelves. I was planning on doing so much. I was planning on hanging doors, putting up gates, all sorts of things. And I'm not able to do it. And it still needs to be done. And it still needs to be done for dog safety, for you know, when my little cousins come around, child safety, all those things. So yeah, it has to be done, and at the moment it's mostly paying a handyman. But I'm getting better. I'm hopefully going to be on the mend soon. I'm hopefully not going to have to drive up and down to between Cornwall and Surrey so often. That's going to take out about 4 days this week. And so, yeah, that should allow me to get back to normal, hopefully some point in October. But it's more tiring than you think. It really is. It's more tiring than you think. Thank you again for all your support. Thank you again for all your kindness. As said, the book space ain't free. And, well, with all the bills coming for having to hire people to do things like doors, etc. This is one of the reasons why I'm looking at the Clarke system, and why I'm, you know, basically saying all the fundraising, and I'm always honest about where the money goes. Normally the money for this channel goes towards books, it goes towards pictures for books which I'm writing and those sort of things, and research trips. At the moment the money is going towards bookshelves. It's going towards bookshelves because I can't make my own at this point, and so I thought, well, if I get the Clarkes, they're strong enough to take the heavy books. They're easy enough to move around and modify as I need them, and I need a lot of them, but I can do it, hopefully, with all your support. So thank you. That's where all the donations are going to. They're going to Clarkes. They're literally going to IKEA. Should probably be organising a blower or ordering a blower hire as well, but you know, I haven't got one of those. And a giant fluffy torpedo. I need all those things. I really do. But anyway, we've now got the bonus slide, and that's more fun. So this is the bonus, and this is one of the coolest pieces of history which comes with the Forrestal class. A C-130 landing on deck. Now these mostly take place in November 1963, but they do have other instances as well. And pretty much I've put the USS United States dream really didn't die. It's more about supercod and carry-on board delivery and supplying carriers in the middle of the ocean than it is necessarily about the USS United States dream didn't really die. But until you realize the fact that that was one of the other advantages of the USS United States and its sisters was going to have, because they're entirely a flat top. Large aircraft like a Hercules could land on them. Large supply aircraft. And supplying carriers in the middle of the sea is logistically very useful. Okay, you can't supply aviation fuel this way, it's really expensive and really inefficient. But you can supply things like engines and crew changes and specialist materials that they might run out of. You can supply. Food is also something else you can deliver this way quite efficiently. Mainly because food is designed to be air transported. Now, the trouble is, really the C-130 idea doesn't go past the exercising testing scenario. Then they work from there and they start going, well, let's look what else we can do, and do develop other carry-on board delivery aircraft. Like the Greyhound. They do a really, really good job. Well, the point is, it starts off here. It starts off with a Forrestal class, Forrestal herself, and it starts off with a C-130. And some very brave crew. But it does lead to a rather interesting question, because one of the other ideas put forward when they were talking about the successors when this was going on was, well, how big a lift would a Hercules make, and how could we turn it into a carrier-capable aircraft? And basically the idea was you'd have to have a folding tail fin, which would fold down somehow, or at least fold 90 degrees. And you'd have to have the wings would have to go literally fold back on themselves. It'd be a maneuver which is more normally associated with British carrier aircraft design than American carrier aircraft design, but it's not unknown. Okay? I'd like to stress that. But you couldn't have them folding up. And there was a discussion as to whether or not it will fit, and it was all sort of a theoretical discussion, but there was some really interesting ideas. And so that leads us to today's question, because today's question is kind of a cool one, I think. What happens if the Hercules does become the carrier-on board delivery aircraft? What happens if the US Navy starts thinking, well, I need to have space for one of these in my hangars, I need to have lifts which can take them, I need to work out a folding wing version of the Hercules? How does it affect other carrier powers? What else ends up getting added on? Because if you can take an aircraft the size of a Hercules, what else can you do? I'd really like to know what you think, and where you think this could have led to. I think it could be highly intriguing. And again, what's coming next this week? Well, it's hopefully the submarine aircraft carriers, so the A400s, and why they're useful, and I'll give you a clue. It's to do with modern submarines as well, have similar utilities. And money for Calyx, Book Space Ain't Free 2 is going to be Brewships 161. Thank you very much again for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you found it useful. I'm sorry this is not a 75-minute long video or an hour so plus long video. It's been a tough day for some reason. And I've actually got the live this evening of Brewships, so I need to conserve some energy. Thank you very much again for watching. Take care, and thank you for your kindness and support.